Welcome to the Community Connection Mental Health Series. My name is Jennifer Kerslake, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Medicine Hat College. Throughout this campaign, we're sharing videos from professionals throughout the region that touch on ways in which we can be empowered as leaders, equip ourselves with knowledge and facts to better relate to those around us, and take action on reducing the stigma and supporting the people we come in contact with on a daily basis. It's small steps that have the potential to make a really big impact on someone's life. And we are so thankful for the generosity of the Niwa family that we can provide these resources to you. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Willie Desjardins. Willie is currently the head coach and general manager for the Medicine Hat Tigers in the Western Hockey League. But his career spans the National Hockey League with the LA Kings and the Vancouver Canucks, the World Juniors, and the Canadian Olympic team. He holds a degree in education and a master's in social work. In his video, Willie shares the importance of leadership and the role it can take in ensuring that athletes not only feel supported, but are mentally prepared to handle adversity. It's through leadership that we can ensure that people have safe avenues to have really challenging conversations and have the tools to strive for their aspirations. We are thrilled to have Willie share his knowledge with our region.
I'd like to thank the Niwa family for leading in this area. You know, I think it's such an important area, mental health, and I think there's so many more struggles today. If you look at where we're at with COVID and all the problems it's caused, you know, I think it's more and more of a concern. You know, a couple years ago, I looked to move my family back to Medicine Hat because it's such a great city, and it's not just a great city. It's the people that are in the city that make it great, and we have a lot of great people. And I think it's important that we look after each other and try to make the best for each other. And you know, I think things are starting to get better. I think one of the reasons we're so great is that we can get together as groups, and you know, hopefully that'll happen here in the near future. Different ways to look at it, but I think there's a couple different intervention points. And the first one, I think that's what I talk about as a coach. And it's just being a good role model, setting a good example, finding ways to teach in adversity, things like that. And that, people don't even know that's happened. If you do it right, like, it just keeps students or players on the right path. So when they have trouble, they'll be able to look back and go, oh, that's how this person handled it. Or, oh, I remember this situation where, you know, I didn't do really that well in that game, but I found a way to, you know, I could overcome that. I think the second part is when you go down the road and all of a sudden you start seeing signs where somebody's really struggling with different issues, and you know, they're being late, or they don't care anymore, or their personality's changing, and that's a different part that I'm not going to talk on because there's other people that are more qualified for sure than me. But I think the first one is you can deal with that as a parent or a teacher or a coach. You get that chance. And I remember when I was with the World Juniors and we went down to Petawawa and we had a training session, and we interacted with the Army that was down in Petawawa, and so we had a get together with the coaches and the officers. And I walked up the stairs and there was this, he was a general, I guess, with all these medals, like tons of medals. And I said, sir, what do you do? And he says, I'm the general for Task Force 2. And that's basically the Canadian Navy SEALs, their hand-to-hand combat. And I thought, well, you know, those probably are similar to hockey players. So I'm always thinking hockey and how we can get better. So I'm going like, how do you pick your man? Like, how do you look to pick your man? And, you know, these guys are elite. And he said, well, I look for two things. He said, I look for people that are athletic, and lots of people would fit into that one. And then the second one, which I thought there'd be lots of them, he just said, I look for people who would never quit. He said, some people I put in a chokehold and they're 30 seconds from passing out and they tap out. He said, other people I'll put in that chokehold and they'll go right under. So he said, I look for guys that won't quit. And I thought about that for a while, and then we talked further. And we said, well, the art of coaching or leading is taking people that are 30 seconds from tapping out to become the ones that can go right under. I go, the question is, how do we do that? And it's how do you make people being comfortable with being uncomfortable? And I think that's what we do as coaches. And I think that's why our sports are great, because sports, a lot of times, don't allow parents to kind of snowplow where they take away all their adversity. Like sports makes kids have adversity. And I think it lets them learn how to deal with adversity. And I think if you never learn early, then you're more susceptible when things go wrong late. And I think that's true with kids that are such good students and then they go to university and they fail out. It's not because they're not smart, because they're gifted. It's just that they don't have the habits. So I think that's our thing in life is making people learn it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay not to know all the answers. All you have to do is get through the day and get to the next day, and they'll kind of take care of themselves. But you have to have the confidence to do that when you're worried and you don't know what the future holds. I think there's a challenge for everybody at every level. Like, how do you make kids, and I think it's making kids feel important. It's making them, that you hear them, that they're of consequence. And I think that happens by your culture. And it's, what kind of a culture do you have? What do you value? What's important to you? And Plato had a quote basically that said that whatever you honor, that's what you'll become. Whatever is important to you, that's what you'll become. And as a coach, I know if I value hard work, I'll have a hardworking team. If I value skills, I'll have a skilled team. If I'm okay with guys taking lots of penalties, I'll take lots of penalties. And what the culture that you create is what's important for your athletes. And so I think when I look at it, it's making your athletes feel valued. And there's a video by Bill Belichick with the Patriots. And Belichick shows this video, and he shows guys making great plays, and nobody's celebrating it. He goes, just look at that, Todd made a great play, nobody seems to care. And then he says, we're not good enough to play that way. And they're an elite team, elite organization. And then he shows another clip where they score a touchdown and they have 7 guys celebrating in the end zone. And he says, you can see we were ready to play this night because of how excited we were when somebody had success. I think the simplest way to change culture and the simplest way to have a great team is to celebrate each other's success. I don't think there's an easier way. And when I go in to talk to my team after every period, I do have a lot on my mind, system stuff, lots of things. But I always ask the other coaches, did anybody do something great out there? Because I don't want to miss that moment. Because if it's important to us, we'll see it more often. So you don't want to miss it. And it's the way you'll get people to buy into what you're doing. And I don't think there's anything that's more important than having the right culture and making sure you hear the kids. And sometimes, with my academy or different things, we'll say, okay, we'll divide the kids up and we make sure that every coach has 5 kids. So they have to touch base with those 5 kids that day. That way nobody gets missed because you only have 5. If you have 20, you all think, oh, we touch base with every time. But sometimes the kids that don't say anything are the kids you miss. And lots of times they're the ones that just need to be heard because, they just kind of go along with it. And I think it's important that we make sure we find a way to touch every kid and make their day better. And just adding to that, when my son started coaching, and he didn't really want much advice from me, but I gave him some anyways. I said the most important thing is that when your guys leave the practice, if you can have one player that felt really good about himself because of something they did on the ice, you had a good practice. It was never if you won the game. It was never how many goals you scored. It was always, if you can do that, you've had a good day. I think another thing that's really important with mental wellness is that leaders realize how important they are. They realize what a difference they make. And there was this thing that talked about a businessman that was over at this dinner party with a group of people, and he said to the one guy, he goes, those that can't do, teach. And he said teachers and coaches are kind of the same. And if you can't do it, that's what you do for a living. And then he asked one of the guys sitting at the table that was a coach, and he said, well, Bob, what do you do? And, he said, what do you make, Bob? Referring to his salary. And Bob, the coach and teacher, replied back, I make a difference. He said, I teach kids how to win and lose. He said, I teach kids how to push themselves harder than they've ever been pushed before. He said, I teach them that not being successful today doesn't mean you can't be successful tomorrow. I teach them those things. And I think we have a responsibility when we coach and we teach. And it goes to being a parent as well, I guess. But you make a difference. You make a difference with kids. And nobody can ever tell you you don't. And you don't even know it. The biggest ones you make, you might get a call 10 years from now. I had a guy that, really successful businessman. I worked with him we played hockey together. And he said, did you remember when you went to bat to keep me on the team? I didn't remember that. This guy had so much success later on. He says, well, you did. And we don't know the things we do by just taking time and caring about our kids. And they're so unique, every one of them. And they're all looking for it. If they weren't looking for it, they wouldn't be there. But they're all looking to learn this. And we can teach them so many lessons, not just when we win, but when we lose is probably more important, is how to do that and how to overcome adversity. You know, when you talk about teaching, one time I was out at a hockey school, and I was at university at the time, but I was teaching at a hockey school, and I had probably 5 to 10 on the ice, and so I was teaching them how to shoot, and I gave a great lesson. I taught them everything about shooting, how to transfer your weight, how to shoot the puck, how to roll your wrist, everything. And I asked them at the end, I go, does anybody have any questions? And this one little guy, he's probably 6 or 7, put up his hand, and he said, do you know there's bears in the woods? And I started laughing after all my great explanation. This is what was on his mind. He didn't get one thing from what I've said. And I think that's what we have to be ready as coaches and leaders, is recognize what your kids are saying. Ken Hitchcock, I talked about him, and he said, you know, kids, you got to ask the questions, how are you doing? Because lots of times we're trying to fix this thing, and the problem isn't the on-ice stuff. The problem is that the kids just aren't engaged. They don't want to be there. And I've often heard this saying, they don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And I think we got to show them we care first, and then after that we can show them what we know. The biggest thing we can do is to make people know when they had adversity before that they were okay, that it wasn't the end of the world. Like lots of times you lose a game and you go, oh, you know, that's the end of the world. But it's not. The next day happens, it goes forward, and it's okay. And, you know, I think that that's something that we have to install. And how do you do it? Your best thing is when you have adversity. That's when you make your best mark. It's when somebody loses, or when somebody's done something so bad that they think, that's it, like I'm done. That's when you can try to help them be successful. And it's your role modeling. It's your role modeling in tough times. It's your creating passion or goals. It's hope. It's hope that knowing one day doesn't define you. And you know, like, I'll have goaltenders that are in the NHL, that all-star goaltenders, and all of a sudden they'll have 3 or 4 bad games, and they think they're not any good anymore. They've lost their confidence. They talk about the 2 biggest determinants of outcome are work ethic, which we can all install, and then confidence and belief is the other one. So it's installing that confidence and belief in kids that they can get through trouble. Like there's good things on the other side. And, you know, lots of examples exist. Like, you know, if you just look at my career, it took me 25 years to get to the NHL. That's a long time. Like that's just, there are things that happen that one day doesn't define it. Like I'll look at like people climbing a mountain. and at the top of the mountain there's fog. And you're tired. You've been up there, you've been working forever, and you're just not getting there. But you might be one step away from the top. And once you get to the top, the other side's downhill. You might be one step away. You just can't quit because you don't know what's there tomorrow. And there's so many great stories. Do you know how many kids that didn't get drafted in the Western Hockey League that have had incredible careers? First round picks in the NHL, but they couldn't get drafted. Derek Dorsett played over 500 games. Tyler Ennis, first round draft pick in the NHL, wasn't drafted as a junior. What happens if he would have given up that day? It must have been a terrible day for him. Here's a guy, both those guys, just waiting to get the call, and they didn't get it. What was their choice? Quit or to prove everybody wrong? And Michael Jordan, same thing. Got cut by his high school basketball team. Tom Brady, like 173rd overall. Steph Curry in basketball. Steph Curry didn't even get to go to one of the major colleges. He wasn't recruited. Like, there's so many great people that have done such amazing things that weren't the star at one time. I talked to Tyler Ennis, and Tyler Ennis went through, I think he had a tough time in Ottawa. He had concussions, so he had lots of things going on. And I asked him about this, and, how did you handle tough times? And he said the important thing to me was having a goal. That was the important thing, is I had a goal that I still wanted to achieve something. And it's us giving our kids the courage to dream to be able to go someplace and do something. And it's not, lots of players that will go and play hockey, they won't go on to play in the NHL or whatever. But there's so many other things that you can take from that. I had all my players on a conference call, and we always have these NHL guys on. And so one day I just put on my roommate from university. He was a farm guy, farm kid. He wasn't any different. Wasn't a top player. He was a guy that his story was an amazing story, because when I became a coach, I asked Dave King, I said, Dave, why did you keep this player? Why did you keep my roommate? Because he was such a terrible player. Like, he was the worst player. And he went on to be an all-star, but at that time, he was really bad. And here's a guy I'm talking to with my whole team later on. And the first thing I showed him about this guy was his McLaren in his garage. He's got this $250,000 car sitting in his garage. And he was just a guy that learned from hockey. And Dave, going back to the story, Dave King said, well, I was going to cut him. Every day I had him on my list to cut. But every day he was the first guy at the rink and the last guy to leave, and he worked the hardest. And I just couldn't do it. I go, well, I'll get him tomorrow. But then we got some injuries, and it worked out. Could have changed everything for him. But that's what happened to him. And he went on to be CEO in Monsanto, really high up in the organization. He made about $4.5 million, I think, that year when I looked him up on the internet because I was going to talk to his kids. But I was just trying to remember his kid's name, and I saw that. So there's lots of things that we can learn from. And there's never a moment that's too big that we can't overcome with help. One of the biggest problems, and you see it in professional sport all the time, is when athletes try to leave the sport. And it's because their identity is so tied up in the sport that there's nothing else as important. And it's funny, because if I would get introduced to my family, I was always introduced as a hockey player. That's how my parents introduced me. And that's how everybody knew. Like, everything that defined me was part of the sport. And even to this day, like, I've never left the sport. That's been part, but I've been one that's been able to find a way to keep going. But it really is dangerous. It's dangerous that you ever get your whole identity tied up in one thing, because that's not who you are. That's just not who you are. Like, it's important to you, but our kids always have to know that if they're successful in sports or not, we still love them just the same. That will never change. And we always think that they know that, but I don't think they always do. And I do think we have to be kind of a little bit careful in how we frame things around our kids and say who they are or what they are. And And if they're good, it goes back to the Plato stuff a little bit. Like, it's what's important to you. Is it important to you that they're an amazing hockey player, or is it important to you that they're an amazing person? And I think that will help them define who they are. But if you always just reward the hockey part, then they'll tie in more with hockey. But if you reward when they do something great for the neighbors, or they do something really good for their brothers or sisters, they're more inclined to think that's more important as well. So I think it's important for us, but that is a real issue, because when something goes bad in something that you've identified with, it's hard for you to think there's anything else. And there's always other things out there. It's getting through that day and getting to the next day. That goes back to the Belichick thing, where it's rewarding when people do little things. It's not scoring the goals. That's exciting. But rewarding when somebody lets somebody else go out on the ice and take their turn. Rewarding when somebody taps a teammate on the shin pad and say, do you see how Jimmy does that? Do you see how he always is encouraging somebody? Because we can all encourage. There's nobody that can't encourage or find good things. It doesn't matter if you're a good player or a bad player. It's finding, and that's what coaches do. Like, I have a choice when we win or lose. If I have those two the same, then my athletes aren't going to strive to win, because winning and losing is exactly the same. So somewhere you have to make a little bit of a difference. And my choice is, it's not yelling at the guys when they do bad. You can do that where they're so afraid that they're going to go hard. I don't do that. I try not to do that. Instead, I try to make winning great. I try to make it great. When somebody does a good play or does something, I try to make sure everybody knows that and they know how important it is. And I think that's the thing that you look for in your, with your athletes. The one thing I think is important too, like, there's a video, it's called Never Give Up by Arthur. This video, it shows a person that basically had given up on life. They'd given up because they couldn't walk anymore assisted. It said, you're done walking. You can't do it anymore. He'd been like that for 15 years. He weighed 300 pounds. He must have been on painkillers for sure. And he'd basically given up. In this video, it shows in 10 months, he changed. He lost 100 pounds. He went from not being able to walk with canes to being able to run. He changed. And there's a couple things. One, for people, you don't know what tomorrow brings. You can make a change. Is it hard? For sure. The first day he did, or the first 10 days, he probably had no results. It didn't look good. But you can make the difference. And for coaches and parents, you can make a huge difference in 4 or 5 months. This guy, the difference that he made in 10 months, we have, like, if you look at a teacher, you have kids for a year. You've got them for 10 months. You can make that difference in their lives by just supporting them and encouraging them. And those are things I think are so important for us to look at and make sure. It's amazing how much coaches that volunteer. Like, how great is that? Like, just doing that. Like, that's so great that you do that. Or teachers, taking the time for your students. And there's frontline workers. There's so many people that have given so much back to our society. And it's recognizing that and recognizing them is important as well. Well, I hope this helped you in some areas. I think it's important that we encourage and support each other in the community. There's lots of trying times right now, and we don't know who's struggling the most with it. So I just want to thank everybody that's put a lot into this project, who's out there working with kids. And I don't think there's anything, you won't know it at the time. Lots of times I don't know it for 5 or 6 years before they call back. But you do make a difference. You make a big difference. And I know I really appreciate that you're taking your time to spend it and help our kids.